At my daughter's wedding, the one I paid $82,400 for, my new son-in-law lifted his champagne glass and smiled. Then he said it. "This is the fat old pig we have to tolerate." Laughter rolled across the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers, gold-trimmed plates, my name on every check. I stood there in a rented tux, holding a pair of silver cufflinks my father gave me in Toronto in 1983, and I did not react. Not when they laughed, not when he smirked. Not even when his father narrowed his eyes at me from across the table and whispered, "Have we met?" Blake thought he had won. He didn't know that in 30 days, the contract already signed in Manhattan would quietly change his life. And he definitely didn't know what his own father had agreed to that morning. Before I tell you what happened next, where are you watching from and what time is it there? I always wonder how far these stories travel. And please take care of your health. Pride heals slower than we admit. Quick note, this is a fictional story with dramatized elements for storytelling and educational value. Because what happened after that toast wasn't laughter, it was leverage. I should tell you who I am before this goes any further. My name is Graham Doyle, 62 years old, born in Ottawa, raised in a house where you fixed your own furnace and shoveled your own snow. I moved to Chicago in 1994 with 2 suitcases and a mechanical engineering degree that no one here cared about. I built things, slowly, small manufacturing contracts at first. Then logistics, then acquisitions. 30 years of long flights, bad coffee, and negotiations that lasted past midnight. I lost hair. I gained scars. I learned patience. When my wife passed 12 years ago, it was just me and my daughter, Emily. She was 19 then, frightened, angry, brilliant. I promised her 2 things. "You'll never have to depend on a man for money," I told her, "and you'll always know I show up." I kept both promises. The wedding was my gift to her. Not because Blake asked. He didn't. He simply assumed. The venue alone was $41,000. Catering for 180 guests, $23,600. The live band she loved from Nashville, another $9,800. I didn't blink when I signed the checks. Blake Halbrook came from old money, not flashy, strategic. His father, Arthur Halbrook, built Halbrook Industrial Holdings into a $240 million regional supplier. Conservative, precise, ruthless when required. Blake was different, polished, educated at Wharton, quick smile, faster ego. He liked to remind people he didn't need my contribution. He said it once in my kitchen while checking his reflection in the microwave door. "We appreciate it, Graham," he said, not calling me Dad, "but my family could have covered it." I looked at him and answered calmly, "I'm not competing with your family. I'm honoring mine." Emily squeezed my arm that night. She didn't see the flicker in Blake's eyes. That flicker wasn't insecurity. It was calculation. Arthur and I had met once before the wedding, briefly. A private lunch arranged through mutual counsel. No announcements, no public filings yet. Just signatures waiting for timing. Arthur had studied me longer than he spoke. "You understand operational discipline," he said. "I understand consequences," I replied. That morning of the wedding, while Blake practiced his vows, Arthur and I finalized the last draft of a transition agreement in a quiet office 3 miles from the ballroom, effective in 30 days. Blake didn't know. Emily didn't know. Even Arthur's board didn't know yet. So when Blake raised his glass and called me a pig, he believed he was humiliating a retired widower with a checkbook. What he didn't realize was this. In less than a month, the man he mocked would have legal authority over the company that funded his last name. And Arthur, sitting there under those chandeliers, already understood it. The question wasn't whether Blake would pay for that toast. The question was whether Arthur would let him. The morning after the wedding, the ballroom smelled like spilled champagne and regret. I left before sunrise. No scene, no confrontation. Just a quiet handshake with the event manager and a final payment confirmation on my phone. $82,400. Cleared. Blake had texted Emily at 2:17 a.m. "Your dad took it too seriously. He'll get over it." She showed me the message while we sat in her kitchen 2 days later. Her hair was tied back, no makeup, no sparkle left from the reception. "Dad, he didn't mean it like that." I didn't answer right away. I poured coffee. Black. Always black. "What did he mean?" I asked finally. She hesitated. "That you're sensitive." I almost smiled at that. Sensitive men don't build companies from scratch. Sensitive men don't survive 3 recessions. Sensitive men don't sit across from private equity firms and say no. But I let it pass. Instead, I asked her about the prenuptial agreement. Her shoulders stiffened. "That's just paperwork," she said. "Blake's attorney handled it." "Did you read it?" "Yes." "Did you understand it?" Silence. That silence was louder than the toast. I requested a copy. Not as CEO, not as strategist, as her father. The clause that caught my eye wasn't about assets. It was 14C, misconduct and reputational damage. If one spouse's public actions materially harmed the financial standing of the Halbrook family brand, the protective equity distribution could be suspended pending review. It sounded protective. It wasn't. Blake had insisted on that clause. Arthur had approved it, reluctantly, according to the margin notes. What Blake didn't know was that Arthur had mirrored that language in a corporate governance amendment signed the same morning as my transition contract. The same definition of material reputational harm. The same review mechanism. Only this time applied to executive leadership. I called Arthur that afternoon. "Your son likes strong language," I said. Arthur paused. "He believes control prevents weakness." "And does it?" I asked. Long silence. "I'm beginning to question that." That was the first crack. Later that week, I received a compliance memo from Leonard Price. Internal audit. It had been buried under Blake's expansion proposal. Projected ROI, 11%. Stress-tested reality, 4.6%. Potential exposure if leveraged through short-term credit, $3.2 million. Blake had moved fast. Too fast. When I confronted him privately in his office, he didn't flinch. "You're not CEO yet," he said calmly. "No," I replied, "but I am observant." He leaned back in his chair. "This company needs aggression. My father built it by being cautious. I'll scale it by being bold." "Bold and reckless aren't the same thing," I told him. He smiled. "They are, if you win." For a moment, I saw something dangerous. Not arrogance, conviction. He truly believed he was right, and that made him harder to defeat. When I left his office, I didn't feel anger. I felt timing. Because if that deal collapsed, if the numbers failed under audit, the very clause Blake thought protected him would activate against him. He just didn't realize the mechanism had already been mirrored at the board level. And Arthur was starting to understand it. The only question left was this. When the moment came, would Arthur protect his son or protect the company? 3 weeks after the wedding, the stock moved. Not dramatically. Not enough for headlines. Just 3.1% down over 2 trading sessions. Most people would ignore that. I didn't. Leonard Price called me at 7:12 a.m. "We ran the secondary stress test," he said. "If the Midwest acquisition underperforms by even 6%, the revolving credit line tightens." "How tight?" I asked. "12 million. That number stayed with me all day. $12 million wasn't fatal for Halbrook Industrial, but it was enough to trigger a covenant review, and covenant reviews invited scrutiny. Scrutiny invited questions. Questions invited exposure. I drove to headquarters that afternoon. Arthur was in his office, blinds half drawn, jacket off, sleeves rolled. He looked older than he had at the wedding. "You've seen it," I said. He nodded. "Blake says the market will correct." "And if it doesn't?" Arthur leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling for a moment. "He believes growth demands risk." "Risk is fine," I replied. "Blindness isn't." There was no anger in the room, just weight. Arthur walked to the window. "When he was 16, he said quietly, he invested his college savings in a startup, lost every cent. He didn't cry. He just said, 'Next time, I won't hesitate.' That kind of resilience builds leaders," I said. "It also builds gamblers," Arthur answered. That was the first time he spoke about his son without defense. Later that evening, I reviewed Blake's presentation deck for the board. It was polished, impressive, confident. Projected integration timeline, 9 months. Projected EBITDA increase, 14%. Projected operational efficiency gain, 8%. Every slide carried certainty, but buried in the appendix was an internal compliance memo, flagged, unsigned. Leonard had recommended delaying the acquisition pending supplier stability review. Blake had marked it not material. That single phrase mattered. Under the governance amendment Arthur and I had signed, dismissal of material risk warnings could qualify as executive negligence. I didn't act immediately. I waited. Timing matters more than reaction. That night, Emily called me. "Dad, Blake says you're trying to undermine him." "I'm trying to measure him," I said. "He thinks you don't trust him." "I don't," I answered calmly. Silence filled the line. "He wants to prove himself," she whispered. "So do I replied. The next morning, the bank sent a quiet inquiry to Arthur's office regarding projected leverage ratios post-acquisition. It wasn't public, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. Arthur called me before noon. "If I call for a formal review," he said, "the board will ask why now." "Because now it's documented," I replied. "And if Blake finds out?" "He will." Arthur exhaled slowly. "You understand what this does to a father?" "Yes," I said. "I do. We scheduled a preliminary audit review for the following Tuesday. Executive session only. Blake wasn't informed. Not yet. When he passed me in the hallway that afternoon, he smiled. "You look busy, Graham." "I am," I said. "With what?" "Stability." He laughed lightly and adjusted his cuff. "You're too cautious." Maybe. Or maybe I had simply lived long enough to know that confidence without discipline collapses under its own weight. By the end of the week, the stock dipped another 1.4%. Small movement, big signal. And Arthur was no longer looking at his son with pride. He was calculating exposure. What Blake didn't know was this. The clause he once insisted on to protect his name was about to define it. The preliminary audit session was scheduled for Tuesday at 9 a.m. executive floor. No assistants, no phones. Blake found out Monday night. I didn't tell him. Arthur didn't tell him. But information moves in buildings like ours, through looks, through silence, through doors that close too slowly. He walked into my office just after 6:30 p.m. The lights were dim. Most of the staff had left. "You're accelerating this," he said, not bothering with a greeting. "I'm reviewing it," I replied. He stepped closer to my desk. "You think I don't know what you're doing?" I leaned back slightly. Calm. Always calm. "What do you think I'm doing, Blake?" "You're waiting for me to stumble." "No," I said. "I'm waiting to see if you correct yourself." His jaw tightened. "You've been here 3 weeks. And you've been here 30 years by inheritance," I answered. That landed. For a second, I saw the boy beneath the executive, the one who had something to prove, the one who had never quite separated his father's shadow from his own outline. "You humiliated me at my wedding," he said quietly. "No," I corrected. "You humiliated yourself." Silence stretched. Then he laughed. Not warmly, not genuinely. "You think the board trusts you more than me?" "I think the board trusts data." He walked to the window and stared out at the skyline. "You don't understand this industry," he said. "It's about momentum. You hesitate, competitors eat you." "And you overextend, lenders eat you," I replied. He turned back. "You're trying to control everything." "I'm trying to prevent a $12 million liquidity squeeze." That number changed the tone. He hadn't expected I knew the exact figure. "You're exaggerating." "No." He held my gaze for several seconds. Then he said something that told me more than any spreadsheet. "If the bank tightens the line, my father will step in." "That's not governance," I said softly. "That's rescue." His confidence flickered, just slightly. Later that evening, Arthur called me to his office. He had the audit draft open. He looked tired. "They're recommending a delay," he said. "Yes. And if we delay, Blake's credibility takes a hit. If we don't delay, and it fails, the company's credibility takes a hit." Arthur removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "You have a daughter," he said. "I do. If she were about to fail publicly, would you intervene?" I didn't answer immediately. "I would correct her privately first," I said. "But if she refused correction, I would not let her burn down what generations built." Arthur nodded slowly. "He believes I never let him take real risks," he murmured. "He thinks I kept him small." "And did you?" Another pause. "I kept him safe," Arthur said. "Safety and strength aren't opposites," I replied, "but they require discipline." He looked at me then, not as incoming CEO, not as adversary, as a father. That's when he told me something I hadn't expected. Blake had personally pushed to include the misconduct clause in the prenup with Emily. He said it protected the Halbrook name, Arthur admitted. Irony has a quiet way of circling back. The same language now sat in the governance amendment that applied to executive leadership. The mirror was already built. Blake just hadn't seen it yet. Tuesday morning arrived. The audit review wasn't dramatic. No raised voices, no accusations, just numbers. Projected growth adjusted downward. Supplier volatility index flagged. Liquidity exposure confirmed. When Leonard Price finished presenting, the room felt smaller. Arthur asked one question. "Was the compliance memo reviewed by executive leadership?" Leonard glanced at Blake. It was marked non-material. Arthur's expression didn't change. Blake spoke immediately. It was a timing decision. Strategic prioritization. Arthur nodded once. Then he said, "We'll reconvene in full board session next week." That sentence mattered. Full board meant documentation. Documentation meant record. Record meant accountability. After the meeting, Blake caught up to Arthur in the corridor. "You're letting him corner me," Blake said, his voice low but sharp. Arthur stopped walking. I'm letting process evaluate you. I'm your son. Arthur's reply was almost a whisper. And you're my executive. Blake stood there, stunned. For the first time since the wedding, he looked unsure. And uncertainty is where real consequences begin. That evening, I received confirmation from legal counsel. If the board determined negligence under the governance clause, suspension of executive authority could be immediate. 30 days until my official start date. 7 days until the full board session. Blake still believed he could win this through force of personality. What he didn't understand was that the board wasn't evaluating charisma. They were evaluating exposure. And exposure was already documented. By Wednesday, the tension had changed shape. It was no longer about projections. It was about posture. Blake stopped joking in hallways. He stopped lingering near Arthur's office. He began scheduling side meetings with 2 board members he trusted most, Randall Pierce and Helen Morrow. Control. That was his instinct. I didn't interfere. Instead, I asked Leonard Price to run one more layer of review, not on the acquisition, but on internal approval flow. What I found wasn't illegal. It was worse. Emails from mid-level risk analysts had been flagged deferred. 2 supplier variance reports marked review later. A compliance note recommending hedging exposure, unanswered. None of these were catastrophic individually. Together, they formed pattern. Pattern becomes narrative. Narrative becomes leverage. That afternoon, Emily came to see me. She didn't sit. She stood by the window like Blake had done days earlier. "Dad, what's happening?" I chose my words carefully. "Your husband is ambitious." "That's not what I asked." "No," I agreed. "It's not." She folded her arms. "He says you're trying to embarrass him. I'm trying to protect the company. And what about protecting him?" There it was, the fracture line. "I would protect him from an enemy," I said quietly. "But I won't protect him from himself." She looked at me as if I had become someone else. "You're different in this building," she said. "I've always been this way." "You're colder." "No," I replied. "I'm clearer." She left without hugging me. That hurt more than Blake's toast ever could. Later that evening, Arthur called me again. His voice was lower than usual. "I reviewed the hedging recommendation," he said. "Blake overruled it." "Yes." "He didn't inform me." "No." Arthur was silent for several seconds. "When I was his age," he said slowly, "I lost a contract because I ignored a warning like that. It nearly cost us the company." "Then you understand," I answered. "He believes I don't trust him." "Do you?" Another long pause. "I don't trust his timing," Arthur said at last. The full board session was now scheduled for Monday. Blake knew. He was preparing a counter-presentation, aggressive, polished, optimistic. He believed numbers could be reframed. Confidence can distort memory. Friday afternoon, he walked into Arthur's office without knocking. I was there. "You're escalating this unnecessarily," Blake said. Arthur didn't look up immediately. "Unnecessarily," he repeated. "Yes, markets fluctuate. Growth requires risk." Arthur finally met his son's eyes. "Risk requires oversight." Blake's voice sharpened. "You're letting him undermine me." Arthur's response came measured, almost weary. "He's not undermining you. He's documenting you." That sentence changed the room. Blake glanced at me. "You enjoy this," he said. "No," I replied. "I endure it." He stepped closer. "If you push this through, I won't forget it." "I don't need you to forget," I said calmly. "I need you to to learn. He left without another word. That night, Leonard sent final confirmation. If the board ruled executive negligence under Clause 4, 2 of the Governance Amendment, suspension could be immediate and public within the company, not media public, internal public, and internal humiliation is more precise. Saturday morning, Arthur asked to meet me privately at his home. No board, no assistants, just two fathers. When I arrived, he was holding a framed photograph, Blake at graduation. "He's not reckless because he's careless," Arthur said. "He's reckless because he's afraid of being small." I understood that fear. "I'm not trying to make him small," I told him. "I'm trying to make him accountable." Arthur nodded slowly. "If I let this proceed, I lose his trust." "If you don't," I replied, "you lose your companies." The weight of that choice hung between us. Sunday night came quietly. Blake sent one final message to the board. "I stand by the strategy. Delay equals weakness." Monday morning would decide more than a deal. It would decide whether Halbrook Industrial was governed by discipline or by ego. And when the board convened at 9 a.m., Arthur would have to speak first. The only question left was this: would he speak as a father or as a chairman? Monday arrived without drama. No raised voices in the lobby, no headlines. Just rain against the glass of the executive floor. The boardroom felt colder than usual. Long table, 12 leather chairs, water glasses untouched. Arthur sat at the head. I sat to his right, Blake across from me, composed, tailored, controlled. He began before anyone asked him to. "We're facing hesitation disguised as prudence," he said, clicking to his first slide. "The Midwest acquisition positions us for a 14% EBITDA increase within 9 months. Delay signals weakness to competitors." His voice was steady, convincing. Randall Pierce nodded slightly. Helen Morrow remained unreadable. Blake continued. "Market volatility is temporary. Momentum is strategic." He was good, too good. When he finished, Arthur folded his hands. "Leonard." Leonard Price stood. No theatrics, just numbers. Revised projection under stress conditions, 4.6%. Supplier Volatility Index elevated 17%. Hedging recommendation, not executed. Credit covenant sensitivity, threshold at $12 million exposure. Silence. Blake leaned forward. "You're modeling worst-case scenarios," he said. "That's my job," Leonard replied calmly. Blake shifted his tone. "If we hesitate every time there's volatility, we'll never scale." Arthur finally spoke. "Scaling without stability invites collapse." Blake looked at him directly. "Is that your position or his?" Arthur did not answer immediately. That pause was louder than any argument. The vote was called, not on the acquisition, but on initiating a formal executive conduct review under Clause 4.2. 7 members present. 6 hands raised. 1 abstention. Arthur. Blake's jaw tightened. "This is procedural theater," he said quietly. "No," I answered. "It's governance." The review did not remove him. Not yet. It placed his authority under temporary limitation pending final determination. Technically subtle, symbolically enormous. After the meeting, Blake followed me into the corridor. "You think this is a win?" he asked. "It's not a win," I said. "It's a boundary." He stepped closer. "You'll regret this." "Regret requires doubt," I replied. "I don't have any." For the first time since the wedding, I saw something different in him. Not anger, fear. Not fear of losing money, fear of losing position. That evening, something unexpected happened. The stock rose 2%. Market analysts interpreted the board's review as disciplined oversight. Stability, risk management, confidence shifted, not toward Blake, but toward structure. Arthur noticed. He called me just before 8 p.m. "They're responding to governance," he said quietly. "Yes. If the review confirms negligence, suspension will be unavoidable." "Yes. And if I sign it?" "You'll be chairman," I replied. "Not father." He exhaled slowly. Later that night, Emily arrived at my house unannounced. She looked exhausted. "He's furious," she said. "I expected that." "He says you orchestrated this." "I orchestrated documentation," I corrected. She sat down heavily. "Why does everything feel like a chess match?" "Because leadership is," I said gently. She stared at the silver cufflinks on my table, the same pair Blake had mocked. "I thought marrying into that family meant security," she whispered. "It does," I said, "if they honor structure. And if they don't, then structure corrects them." She looked at me with something new in her eyes, not accusation, recognition. The executive conduct review would conclude Friday morning. If confirmed, Blake's authority could be suspended immediately under governance clause alignment, the same language he had once insisted on to protect the Hallbrook name. He still believed he could out-argue it. He still believed charisma could override clause. But governance is patient, and Friday was coming. Friday morning came with unusual stillness. No rain this time, just clear glass and a skyline that looked indifferent to what was about to happen. The executive conduct review had concluded at 7:45 a.m. Leonard Price had delivered the final memo to Arthur and the board. 6 pages, precise, clinical. Conclusion: executive risk override without documented mitigation strategy. Impact: potential covenant breach exposure. Recommendation: temporary suspension of executive authority pending strategic restructuring. Not dramatic, decisive. At 8:30 a.m., Arthur asked me to step into his office. He was standing when I entered, not seated. That mattered. "The board supports the recommendation," he said. "I expected that." "He doesn't." Arthur's voice was steady, but thinner than usual. "He still believes this is an overreaction." "It isn't," I replied. "It's proportion." Arthur walked to his desk and rested his hands on the polished wood. "If I sign this, Graham, it becomes official." "Yes." "And if I don't, then governance becomes optional." He looked at me sharply. "You're very certain." "No," I said quietly. "I'm very consistent." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Arthur picked up the pen. The signature took less than 3 seconds, but it cost him more than the ink. At 9 a.m., Blake was called into the boardroom. He entered with the same posture he'd carried since the wedding. Shoulders squared, chin level. Arthur didn't waste time. "Effective immediately," he said. "Your executive authority is suspended pending final structural review." Blake didn't blink. "You're making a mistake." Arthur held his gaze. "I'm making a decision." Blake turned to me. "This is what you wanted." "No," I answered calmly. "This is what the clause required." He laughed softly. "You hide behind clauses. I stand behind structure," I corrected. There was a difference. Blake straightened his jacket. "Fine. Suspend me. The market will correct. You'll look foolish in a quarter." Helen Morrow spoke for the first time. The market responded positively to oversight. Blake's expression shifted. Not panic, but disbelief. He had always trusted narrative. He hadn't expected the numbers to betray him. After he left the room, silence lingered. Arthur remained seated. For several seconds, he stared at the empty chair where his son had been. He'll never forgive me, he said quietly. Maybe not, I replied, but the company will. That afternoon, internal communication went out. Clean, professional, non-inflammatory, executive authority transition in effect, interim oversight expanded, governance alignment reaffirmed, no humiliation, no spectacle. But inside the building, everyone understood. Blake Halbrook had been removed from operational control, and the man he once called a pig was about to assume formal authority in less than 3 weeks. That evening, Blake requested a private meeting with me. We sat across from each other in a quiet conference room. "You think you've won," he said. "I think this was avoidable," I replied. "You could have coached me." "I tried." He leaned forward. "My father chose you. He chose discipline." Blake's voice lowered. "I will not disappear." "I don't expect you to." He studied me for several seconds. "Then what do you expect?" I met his eyes. "That you decide whether you want to be powerful or responsible." He didn't answer. When he left the room, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Not rage, not arrogance, uncertainty. Arthur called me late that night. "I've done what governance required," he said. "Now, what do you intend to do?" There it was. The real question. Suspension was one thing. Restructuring the future was another. Because in 21 days, my CEO contract would activate. And when it did, I would have the authority to reshape everything. 3 weeks later, my contract activated. No ceremony, no applause. Just a legal timestamp at 8 a.m. On a Tuesday morning, Graham Doyle, Chief Executive Officer, Halbrook Industrial Holdings. Titles sound heavier than they feel. I walked into the building the same way I always had. Early, quiet, coffee in hand. The silver cufflinks at my wrists, the same pair Blake once mocked, caught the morning light as the elevator doors closed. Power doesn't arrive with noise. It arrives with responsibility. Blake had been placed on restricted access, not terminated, not publicly disgraced, just repositioned into strategic advisory review. Corporate language is merciful. Human consequences are not. The first thing I did as CEO was not to fire anyone. It was to call a full executive alignment meeting. All department heads, all senior finance leads. Arthur present as chairman. Transparency was the message. I stood at the head of the long table and began without slides. "We will proceed with structural reform," I said. "Not expansion, not acceleration, discipline." Munish Randall Pierce raised an eyebrow. "You're slowing momentum." "I'm stabilizing foundation." Helen Morrow nodded once. I laid out the plan: acquisition postponed, pending supplier reevaluation. Hedging protocol mandatory on leverage, exceeding $5 million. Independent compliance review, reporting directly to the board. Executive decision override documentation required. Nothing dramatic. Everything permanent. Arthur watched me closely. He understood what this meant. This wasn't about punishing Blake. It was about removing the environment that enabled him. After the meeting, Arthur remained behind. "You're dismantling the speed culture," he said. "I'm dismantling fragility." He gave a faint, tired smile. "You're thorough." "I'm accountable." He leaned on the edge of the table. "What happens to my son?" "He stays," I said, "if he adjusts." "And if he doesn't?" "He becomes external." Arthur didn't respond. Later that afternoon, Blake came to my office without knocking. He didn't sit. "You're gutting everything I built." "I'm reinforcing it." "You're stripping authority." "I'm clarifying it." He paced once across the room. You think the board will back you forever? I think the board backs stability. He stopped walking. You're not staying long, are you? That surprised me. Why would you think that? You don't behave like someone building an empire, he said. You behave like someone cleaning one. He wasn't wrong. I looked at him carefully. This was never about replacing you, I said. It was about correcting trajectory. His voice softened for the first time. You could have ended me. I didn't. Why? Because leadership isn't revenge. He stared at me, searching for weakness. There wasn't any to find. The restructuring plan was approved unanimously within 48 hours. Stock stabilized, then rose modestly. 8% over 3 days. Nothing flashy, just confidence. Friday evening, Arthur invited me to his home again. He poured 2 glasses of bourbon and handed me one. You could stay, he said quietly. Long term. The board would extend you. I took a slow sip. I was hired to correct, I replied, not to conquer. Arthur studied me. Blake believes you're positioning yourself as permanent. I'm positioning the company as sustainable. He nodded. And when this is complete, I step down. The words hung in the air. Arthur's eyes shifted. Surprise, then understanding. You'll leave him the structure, he said. Yes, and the lesson, if he chooses to see it. Arthur exhaled slowly. He still resents you. That's allowed. He looked at me more openly than he had in months. You humiliated him that night. No, I said gently. He humiliated himself. Arthur didn't argue. The following Monday, I finalized the governance amendments and filed the updated oversight structure with legal. 30-day restructuring complete. Executive authority stabilized. Credit covenant secure. Exposure reduced below $4 million threshold. Blake remained under review. Not suspended anymore, but monitored. He believed he had survived. In a way, he had. What he didn't realize was that the most important decision was still ahead. Because stepping down is easy. Stepping back at the right moment is power. And when I announced my intention to resign at the next board meeting, Arthur would have to decide something far more difficult than governance. He would have to decide what kind of father he wanted to be. The board meeting began at 9 a.m. sharp. No rain, no tension in the air this time, just clarity. I stood at the head of the table, not because I needed to, but because the moment required it. Before we proceed with quarterly updates, I said, I have a formal statement. Arthur watched me carefully. Blake sat 2 seats down, posture straight, expression unreadable. I accepted this role to restore structural discipline and stabilize governance. That objective has been completed. A slight shift around the table. Effective in 30 days, I will step down as Chief Executive Officer. Silence, not confusion, shock. Randall Pierce leaned forward. You're resigning? I'm transitioning, I replied. Helen Morrow spoke next. The board is prepared to extend your term. I appreciate that, I said, but permanence was never my intention. Blake's eyes narrowed slightly. Arthur remained very still. I continued. The revised governance framework will remain in place. Oversight protocols are permanent. Executive authority remains subject to documented compliance review. That sentence mattered. It meant the structure would outlive me. It meant no one, not even blood, would be above it. Blake finally spoke. You're leaving after destabilizing everything. I turned toward him. I'm leaving after stabilizing it. He held my gaze. You forced a suspension. I enforced documentation. The difference lingered. Arthur cleared his throat. The chair recognizes Mr. Doyle's service, he said evenly. The governance amendments stand. He did not look at his son when he said it. That was the real announcement. After the meeting, Blake followed me into the corridor. "You planned this," he said. "Yes. You never wanted control." "No." "Then what did you want?" I paused. "For you to experience consequence without destruction." He laughed once, but it wasn't cruel. "You think this was mercy?" "Yes." His voice lowered. "You humiliated me." "No," I said quietly. "I protected the company from you." That truth landed differently now. He studied me for several seconds. "You're walking away," he said. "I'm walking out on time." "Why?" "Because if I stay, you'll blame me for every shadow." He didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Arthur came to my office alone. "You're giving him the company," he said. "I'm giving you the structure," I replied. "You're giving him the opportunity." Arthur exhaled slowly. "He may fail." "Then it will be his failure," I said. "Not yours," Arthur nodded. "You could have taken everything." "I don't need everything." He looked at the silver cufflinks on my desk. "You wore those the night he insulted you." "Yes." "You never reacted." "I reacted by waiting." Arthur allowed himself the smallest smile. "You're a difficult man to hate, Graham. That helps." Before I left that evening, I requested one final private conversation with Blake. We met in the same conference room where he once accused me of enjoying his fall. He remained standing. I remained seated. "You think I'm ready?" he asked. "No," I answered honestly. He blinked. "Then why leave?" "Because readiness isn't given. It's tested." He looked at the table for a moment. "My father will always compare me to you." "Only if you compare yourself first." He didn't respond. I stood and adjusted my jacket. "The governance structure isn't your enemy," I said. "Your ego is." That was the last professional sentence I gave him. When I walked out of the building that evening, no one applauded. No one needed to. The board would formalize my departure in 30 days. Arthur would remain chairman. Blake would remain under oversight. The system would hold. But there was one more conversation that had to happen. Not in a boardroom, not in an office. At my daughter's dinner table. Because power restructures companies. It also restructures families. And Emily still hadn't asked me the one question that mattered. 30 days passed quietly. No headlines. No internal drama. Just transition documents and final signatures. On my last morning as CEO, I arrived early again. The building looked the same. Glass, steel, disciplined silence. But I felt lighter. Arthur met me in the lobby, not as chairman, not as negotiator, as a man who had made a decision and lived with it. "He's adjusting," Arthur said. "That's good." "He doesn't thank you." "He doesn't need to." Arthur nodded once. "He argues less." "That's progress." We shook hands, firm, respectful, no sentimentality. That wasn't our language. Blake did not come to see me off. I didn't expect him to, but 2 days later I received a short email. Subject: Oversight Protocol. Understood. No apology, no reconciliation, just acknowledgement. For a man like him, that was something. Emily invited me to dinner the following Sunday. Small table, no formal setting, just pasta and quiet conversation. Blake was polite, measured, controlled, different. He spoke more carefully now, listened longer. At one point he said, "We're implementing the hedging protocol you suggested." I nodded. "Good." Emily watched us both. When Blake stepped outside to take a call, she leaned forward. "Did you ever want to hurt him?" she asked softly. I thought about that. No, I said. I wanted him to face reality before reality crushed him, she swallowed. He says you could have destroyed him. I could have, I admitted, but you didn't. No. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you. That mattered more than any board vote. When I returned home that night, I opened the small wooden box on my dresser and placed the silver cufflinks inside. They had done their job, not as symbols of status, but as reminders. Humiliation tests ego, power tests character, but restraint tests both. I've lived long enough to know something most young executives don't. Authority is temporary, reputation is cumulative, and revenge, when done loudly, leaves scars you cannot reverse. What I chose wasn't revenge. It was correction. Arthur kept his company. Blake kept his opportunity. Emily kept her marriage, for now. And I kept my dignity. That was enough. Thank you for staying with me today. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I always wonder how far these stories travel. And please note, this story contains fictionalized elements created for entertainment, educational, and reflective purposes. If this story moved you even a little, another one is waiting on your screen right now. YouTube believes you'll enjoy it, and I think you might too.